right, welcome everyone to our next session, what a next system teach-in looks like. I'm Amy Cohen, I teach law at Temple, and I have three fabulous panelists to talk about how to do this, how to build relationships across students, faculty, many other university workers, administrators, community members, how to learn from each other, how to do this where I'm zooming in from in the United States, but we're also thinking globally in many other places around the world. So we have Ben Manski, for those of you just joining us, a sociologist at GMU, the director of Next System Studies at Mason. He studies social movements and system change and has been just a tireless organizer, bringing us all together here. We have Matt Nelson, who is the executive director of Presente, an organization dedicated to advancing Latinx power and collective welfare. Previously, he was the director at Color of Change and has co-founded several worker-owned cooperatives, and is a seasoned campaign strategist and community organizer who has trained thousands of activists. And we have Jasmine Banks, who is the co-founder, organizer, executive director of Generation Common Good. She has long worked on progressive advocacy, movement building, and her organizing experience includes leading an intervention campaign, Uncoke My Campus, where she organized multiple campuses, coalitions, and provided movement support to hundreds of students and educators and community activists. So we're so grateful that you're here to talk with us and share how we can do this work. So Ben, I'll start with you.
Sure. Yeah, and I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to just share a little bit about the history of teach-ins and where teach-ins come from as a form of education and organizing and community building. And I want to draw everybody's attention to an article, or actually several articles that appear at nextsystem.org under the resources page. There's one that's about the history of teach-ins going back to the mid-1960s. And there's another that I co-authored with Garl Perovitz about the pilot wave of teach-ins that happened a number of years ago. And those will basically some of the same things that I'm going to say right now you can find in print there. And as you'll see at that page, there was a request for resources because there is a team of people who are a library and mapping committee who have been meeting to put together a next system library. So things that you think are useful, please let us know. Let us know. So let's recognize that this phrase, the teach-in, or this word teach-in with a hyphen in it, has its origins in a particular year, and that's 1965. And that was a year in which the movement for an end to the U.S. war in Vietnam and on the people of Vietnam was really cresting and had been building for some time. And at the University of Michigan and at other institutions, there was this innovation that became known as the teach-in, and it rolled across college campuses in the following weeks and months. And so there have been a series of waves, and it's really the Vietnam War teach-ins that many people still think of when they're thinking about what a teach-in is. But we should also recognize that there have been other major waves in the United States of teach-ins, and those waves have actually changed social movement and world history as well. So that includes the first Earth Day, which was organized as a teach-in, inspired by and organized by many of the same people who had organized the teach-ins on the war in Vietnam. Earth Day 1970 was a teach-in. The women's movement organized teach-ins in the 1970s. And I should point out that the kinds of events that took place in each of these three major waves of teach-ins were different in each case. The scale, the locations, the kinds of activities that people took part in. In the 1980s, you had the teach-ins on apartheid in South Africa. And those took place not only here in the United States, but all over the world. In the 1990s, some of us who were gathered here organized what were initially called the National Teach-ins on Corporations, Education, and Democracy. And then that was shortened to the Democracy Teach-ins. And there were 5 major rounds of Democracy Teach-ins involving people at hundreds of college campuses across North America and also Mexico and Puerto Rico. And those were quite significant in terms of developing the analysis of the corporatization of education and playing a role there. In the 2000s, a little known but quite significant, you had the 10th State University movement that started at Rutgers and was propagated across the country with, again, large numbers of people camping out in the center of their campuses, students, faculty, staff, and community members coming together and teaching each other and themselves about the crisis in higher education. The Occupy movement became a teach-in with all these people coming together and people self-organizing all kinds of forms of teaching. And of course, with Black Lives Matter, you had waves of teach-ins on college campuses and communities. And there are certain things that these teach-ins had in common, and there are other things that were quite different about each wave of teach-ins. But some of the things that they generally involved were sort of a mix of different forms of people coming together. So you had great assemblies, very large numbers of people coming together, panels, speakers, debates, speak out, speaker's mic. So large numbers is kind of characteristic of the teach-ins. You had, in the case of universities and colleges, courses that were integrated into the teach-ins, right? So people reorienting existing courses and existing programming to make the connections with what the teach-ins were about. You had oftentimes festivals with art and music and dance and fairs and all kinds of participatory ways for people to engage in expression. You have a lot of small group events. Sometimes they might be book groups or workshops or trainings or skill shares. You have sometimes mobile events. Sometimes the teach-in is not stationary. You'd have walking tours, you'd have parades, sometimes you'd have picnics that would be part of the teach-ins. And oftentimes protests played a major role. And it wasn't so much that the teach-ins were themselves protests, but that protests brought a teach-in in. So, for example, when the Wisconsin uprising began in 2011, I was teaching as an adjunct faculty member at Madison Area Technical College, and my students wanted to go to the Capitol, so I taught in the basement of the Capitol building throughout that semester, and that was going on. So, there's lots of different forms that these teach-ins, forms of teaching each other that these teach-ins made use of. So, what were these teach-ins not? What is not a teach-in? And I raise this because this word gets used all the time and it drives me a little crazy. And I sometimes get grumpy and I send emails. I'm sorry to the folks who did the teach-in on environmental justice here at GMU this past week. But a panel or a workshop or a set of workshops is not a teach-in. A Zoom session is definitely not a teach-in, right? They're important. They're nice. They're not teach-ins. What teach-ins are is they are gatherings, comings together, convergences that are intended to produce knowledge for use by people participating in them as members of an organized and politicized community, right? So the community, the campus community, that's what a teach-in, it involves all those people. And you'll know a teach-in has been successful if it becomes difficult for anybody who's a member of that community to not at least know that it happened, right? That's maybe not everybody participates, but it becomes, if a good teach-in, it's impossible for somebody to not know that it happened. Everybody has to relate to it. So I'll end with this. What have teach-ins accomplished over the years? Some of the things that these teach-ins have accomplished. Well, one thing they accomplish is that at each site of a teach-in, they build relationships within the campus community and across campus communities and across campuses and communities. And that relationship building between students, faculty, staff, and community members, very, very important for the teaching process. So a lot of organizing and new things come out of teach-ins at particular places. Social movements either surface through teach-ins. You think about the environmental movement coming out of Earth Day, right? Or they expand greatly. Think of Black Lives Matter through the teach-in process. And then finally, in terms of scholarship, new fields of study. I mean, environmental studies, women's studies, they come out of these teach-ins process. So that's a little bit of a history of the teach-ins, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Great. Thank you, Ben. And just going in order that I have, Matt, if I can turn to you next.
Sure. And by way of introduction, I'll show off my coffee mug. Everyone can read it. I know I'm not perfect, but I'm so close that it scares me. It's actually just what I picked up off the shelf. That's not my actual introduction. Matt Nelson with Presente. Born in Colombia, grew up in Minneapolis. I'm proud Minneolumbian, and I'm happy to be here. Thank you so much for the incredible team who put this together the last day, yesterday and today. And yeah, let's go. Thank you for kicking that off, Ben. I think, part of what I was thinking about in this conversation is that the teaching relates to some of the most fundamental important parts of organizing. And there's many ways to describe them, but I think a shorthand is and I think, Ben, the last point you touched on was culture and culture change. And I do think that teachings, when done well, get us into this realm of culture and shifting culture. And that's a very powerful realm that involves not just people learning stuff and thinking, not just engaging in people's minds, but actually engaging in people's hearts, engaging in what inspires us collectively. And just to break that down a little bit more, is that there's, in every organizing activity, fundamental is relationship building. So there's the relationship building, there's always a narrative side, there's always a strategy piece, there's always an action part of it, and there's always a structure to keep it together. And in many ways, teach-ins are a way to hold that container of all of these important, critical aspects of organizing and get us potentially to an active practice of changing culture and leveraging that power of culture. And I think part of where this relates to why that's needed now, like all the things, relationship building, the narrative, the strategy, and the culture shift is needed now, as well as the structure and the container, which I think the teach-ins also provide, is because just the stakes are so high. And I think about the story of the original demands of the Montgomery bus boycott, which were just less brutal segregation. Those are the initial demands. That's what organizers thought they could win. But once they were in a process, which I would argue is a very much like a teach-in process during that time, once they were able to strategize, they were able to do the relationship building, they were able to have these conversations, then the objectives and the demands and the political imagination got so much larger. And it became a way, so okay, those aren't just our objectives and demands. We can go so much bigger. And I think that's a story around creating an environment that allows us to think, that touches a political imagination, that allows us to go beyond transactional objectives, transactional campaigns, transactional demands, and into this realm of both transitional demands and objectives, into the realm of transformational change. And it changes you as a person. And so there's also a pedagogy here that Ben referenced in the last session, is like, before, all these great things were on campuses because of social movements, because of liberation struggles, there were freedom schools, and there were places where people organized. There were union halls. There were places where people organized. And so the teach-in sort of brings, ideally, some of the best of both of those worlds. And just the last thing I'll say about it is when we're active in sort of there's a movement around representation on campus, around addressing recruitment and retention of people of color and other marginalized communities within universities. And it was always recruitment and retention and campus culture. And usually it went that way. It's like, oh, we need to recruit, we need to retain, we can't. But actually, what we learned is that campus culture has to come first. And so a teach-in is a way to directly shape and address and acknowledge what's often a hostile climate of organizing. Yeah. And today we're in a very hostile climate of organizing. And I do think that means that, like, we need, I think the last panel talked about community and collective care, that can be built into a teach-in as a way to reach people and their whole selves to shift culture and to move us again toward transformational change that we all want and need.
Amazing. Thank you, Matt. And as I turn to Jasmine, I just want to encourage all of you, put questions in the chat. We'll have plenty of time to have a conversation. So please go ahead and do that. And Jasmine.
Hey, y'all. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Jasmine Banks. I'm coming to you from Washington, D.C., but my heart is in Arkansas and Oklahoma, the Cherokee Nation. It's important for you to know about me that I am African American, first generation descendant from lynching survivors and Jim Crow and enslavement, as well as a relative and freedman clan member of two indigenous nations, with a little bit of Belgian settler sprinkled in there. Not that our identities qualify us to do this work, but the politics and the conditions that shape those identities and those experiences and the political commitments to the liberation of my people and to the addressing of settler colonialism does qualify me. So I'm so excited to be here. Y'all are such learned, experienced people. I'm having a little bit of imposter syndrome, but I want to share some thoughts about the Next Systems teach-in. I want to frame it in the context of a case study, a bit of the work that I did on the campus at George Mason University, and then kind of give a broader higher education context. I see these teach-ins as a powerful opportunity to build solidarity across students, faculty, and community members. And I want to talk about how these teach-ins can be a launching pad to move beyond just short-term coalitions and alliances, but into something what many of us call common struggle, where our efforts are linked by shared values and goals with a vision of reclamation and co-creation, because it's already been stated, we know that higher education wasn't really envisioned to suit all of us. So we can reclaim what parts of it are a common good and then co-create and fully establish education as a true common good to serve the people and the planet. And so I want to just give a note on impact. I think that higher education organizing is uniquely powerful in many ways, but I hear so many young people critique it as, oh, this is just an elite, site. It's not really truly of the people. And I wanted to just trouble that a little bit. I think that higher education is uniquely powerful because it organically brings together a cross-class, intergenerational, multiracial subset of our society, right? Students, faculty, and staff, and community members each are bringing in different strengths and experiences to the table. Students are offering bold imagination and urgency for change. Faculty contribute through institutional knowledge and lend a layer of credibility that can be powerful for inside strategies. Of course, the staff have deep understanding, and then community members, they understand that the university's expansion and exploitation impacts them, right? And it links them and then roots us to broader struggles for justice. So the mix reflects this beautiful concentration, but it's in that high stakes environment that has been named. And because oftentimes these groups converge spontaneously around our shared vision of what needs to change and injustices, it makes our organizing so dynamic and potent. And so as we're thinking about these teach-ins, we know there's going to be both generative and toxic conflict that could come up. And so I wanted to also address that quickly. Some people are calling it the fight for identity politics, or those of us who are in these spaces that are talking about our oppression and who should lead or who should be centered. And I think Fred Moten names us to meet in the undercommons, where we, the colonized, the queer, the otherwise marginal, make meaning with each other. And I think teach-ins can do that. They act as a site for meaning making that informs that transformative strategy. Moten said the coalition emerges out of your recognition that it's fucked up for you in the same way that it's fucked up for me, right? And it's killing us, however, slowly. And so we need each other. The work at Uncook, my campus in George Mason University, though we were at other universities as well, but we always called GMU our battleground campus. It taught me that when groups unite and not just create a temporary coalition, but one that is deep, where we're in each other's spaces, we're building true relationship, that the alchemy of that it absolutely transforms. It's actually the thing that helped inspire the birth of the organization I now lead, Generation Common Good. And so the case study here with with George Mason. At GMU, the Uncoke My Campus campaign began as a student-led effort. A teach-in was a part of that effort, and really they sought to expose and challenge undue corporate influence on campus, specifically the millions of dollars that had been poured into that university by Charles Koch Foundation. And the concern was that the donations were compromising academic freedom and allowing private interests to dictate curriculum and even hiring decisions, right? Students, faculty, and community members came together under the banner of a group called Transparent GMU, demanding transparency and accountability. Eventually, there were motions that were passed from the faculty senate. Community members got involved. Alumni were organized to voice their concern. And what emerged was a broad-based movement. The campaign continued under the banner of Uncoke My Campus GMU, and we broadened our approach to remove Koch-funded centers and also push the university in a direction that served the public good and highlighted how private profit was corroding the GMU campus. So what lessons did we learn? Well, besides the fact that we learned that Angel Cabrera really hated me as well as so many other students, we took some really important structural and lessons on how we organized. So we, again, broad, lasting coalitions matter. So at Uncoke GMU, the students never acted alone. They involved the faculty, the alumni, lawmakers, community groups, each bringing the strengths that they had. The second of the 5 lessons was the common vision over the temporary alliance, right? We understood that it wasn't just transparency or academic freedom, that it was a part of a broader set of work. The third thing we learned was around escalation and persistence. Whenever we started with polite petitions and they failed, we were bird dogging at faculty senate events. We were showing up, right? It was about the teach-in being the starting point for deeper organizing. We understood how the teach-in then created a pathway for inside-outside tactics. And so we were able to address our interventions on multiple fronts simultaneously. And then there was more long-term organizing, right? Transparent GMU turned into Uncoke GMU, and it didn't stop after the lawsuit that we leveraged in 2017. It evolved into a new campaign rooted in the same principles, but ultimately was about creating this generative sort of process where new faculty, new students, new alumni, and community members became aware about the problems and the issues related to the initial complaints of our campaign. So I've got maybe 1 more minute left. I don't know how much time.
Go ahead, please.
I'm going to keep going. So I've got some recommendations because I've been training student organizers to work in these intergenerational, cross-class, multiracial formations. And I think that the teach-ins, as you plan them, need to include everyone, right? From the beginning, bring together all of the folks and reject ideological rigidity and understand that we can bring people along and that the teach-in is a site for that. I also think these teach-ins for the next system process could focus on systemic issues and alternatives, right? They connect you to problems that are happening in our communities, but those problems translate into broader systemic challenges. So whether it's privatization, climate justice, or labor rights, they're all in that sort of constellation. An example here is that our lesson at GMU is what might seem like a niche campus issue, right? It started with donor transparency, but it actually opened a window for folks to have a broader systemic analysis, talking about what it looks like when the privatization of public education happens. And then conversely, it created a catalyst for imagining alternative systems, universities being accountable to the public instead of their shareholders, creating more of a democratized governance model. So I encourage y'all to think about, I'm so Southern, y'all. So I encourage y'all to think about topics and ask why, like what is the deep root causes that we're thinking about, and then pair critical analysis with those visionary alternatives. By the end of our experience of teaching as a tactic and a strategy for springboarding into change, I hope that all the participants of the teach-ins that you'll be planning feel not only that the status quo is unacceptable, but they have concrete, better systems that they can name that are within reach so that they're building toward action, they're collaborating, and they're reflecting. It's, and also it's inviting conflict, not as a sign of failure, but an opportunity for growth and deeper solidarity. Lastly, I'll say that the Uncoke My Campus campaign at GMU really did show how we can unite across difference and commit to that thing called common struggle and really win real change. We didn't win our lawsuit, but GMU will not be the same as a result of our work, and it created critical mass and conditions for other work to emerge. We created cracks in the pavement for beautiful things to grow through. And so I think the next systems teaching can be a powerful vehicle for building that kind of unity. I hope that y'all can take some of these fastly named lessons from GMU, as well as other countless struggles, and look forward to the hope and power that the next systems teach-ins can be. I think if we organize with the understanding that our fights for racial justice, climate, academic justice, academic freedom, and economic democracy, it's all interconnected. Right? We move from these moments of temporary alliance to a united front for transformation. And in the spirit of the teach-in tradition, let's continue to educate, agitate, and organize together.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you. Maybe I'll just start with a comment. I see there's one question. I encourage other folks to put questions in the chat, maybe a comment and a question. So something I appreciated so much is how all of you are sort of holding together, and we heard this in the last panel too, right? This sense of higher education as this democratic and transformational space, and this sense of all the inequalities and exclusions that have shaped the institutions we have, and the sense of the contemporary anti-democratic dangers, and then touching down in ways that really talk about people and relationships, culture change, collective care, struggle, the sense that it's not a teach-in unless relationships change and people know each other in different ways. Thinking really broadly about who's in a community. And maybe to put this into a question, Jasmine, I was really struck by the number of times you also mentioned conflict. Potentially disruptive conflict, generative conflict, hard conflict, and maybe to put a question to all of you as you think about this form of organizing. It's not just about content, it's about people. How do you think about conflict processes as part of it?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. I used to, first of all, my approach and practice and commitment to generative conflict comes out of the Black radical tradition. I have had the beautiful opportunity to be a part of BOLD, which is Black Organizing for Leadership and Dignity. And we do a lot of looking at what conflict does for us. I think particularly within the Western idea, the way that Enlightenment and a lot of Eurocentric visions of what family and community are supposed to look like, particularly through the nuclear family model post-Reagan, conflict is like gotten a bad name, right? Like raising your, not like the scary abuse stuff, but like raising your concerns, really being in the struggle. And so I try and teach my children, I have 4, and the young people that I'm in relationship with, that conflict is an invitation to deeper relationship, not to fracture. And so we have to learn how to not be conflict avoidant. We have to know that we are bold enough to tolerate the difference that comes. And that if we find ourselves in a place, particularly in movement building and system change and transformation, where there's no conflict and everyone agrees with us, you might have landed in a cult or in a echo chamber. And those places are not the places where power is built. Power is built across difference with a commitment to solidarity. And so yeah, the conflict component is, how does this transform me in service of the work? And how does this transform us in service of our commitment to the greater good and the vision? And we had a lot of conflicts. We had people who just wanted donor agreements. And then we wanted other people who were part of our work who wanted to abolish the university altogether, despite being students or faculty themselves, right? And we had to figure out, how do we hold that tension? One of the things that folks often ask me, because I've been a student of the Koch network and how they hold their relationships, people go, well, what is the secret sauce that, quote, the left doesn't have, but the far right libertarian fossil fuel interests do? And I say, oh, well, they're not scared of their janky cousins going on Fox News and saying whatever. They say after that, you can still rock with us. So the challenge of our time is to lower the bar of entry for folks and understand that not everyone has to be the polished ivory tower language of hetero cis patriarchy. Some of them are just folks who want to do this work, who need to have places in it, where it's everyday working class people, and it's not a litmus test for orthodoxy or ideology in that way. Not to say that we shouldn't have political rigor or commitments and values and principles. Those things do matter. And I think part of our most recent, like the 10, 15-year trend for progressive folks or people who are doing system change, has been to create such a sanitized version of who's allowed to be in this space. And that is the antithesis of what a teach-in should be, right? So that's what I'll say about conflict. But yeah, let's fight.
Nan, but I don't know if you want to jump in.
Sure. I don't know if you said Matt or Ben, but I'm happy to jump in.
I did the moderate. I said both, which is not very good facilitation. It creates conflict.
Yeah, I'm really happy that we're talking about this as a topic. This could be a whole, it could be a whole teaching, the nationwide conflict teachings. But I want to defer to just someone I respect a whole lot. I'm going to put her book in the chat. Loretta Ross is the genius here, honestly. And as someone who, directly engaged and facilitated with, severe, violent white supremacists and misogynists, and sort of went to the deepest forms of potential conflict and real conflict and violence, and sort of came out and just, I think it has such a beautiful take on it. And so I would encourage people to really kind of ground yourself in her work. And I don't say that lightly, like, if you know me, I'm not like someone's like, "Ugh," but Loretta is fantastic. And so part of what I've learned from her and is like, I is that some of this is always going to be here, like tension. I usually refer to it as tension, because I think like tension is always going to be here, and it's not something you're ever going to totally eliminate, and that shouldn't ever be the goal. But being able to have good practice that acknowledges, that embraces, that like creates space for that tension to be, to come out, is important as part of regular practice. And I think it does get back to, there are things that we have to do every day as organizers and as people who want freedom for all. And one of those things is the relationship building. Another thing is to have like really good practice in identifying together, naming, and then releasing tension that's always going to come up. I think the other thing that I would say on this is let me try to think about. I was trying to think about a particular example, but I guess like we want people to be able to to be whole in this work, and I think that there's so much healing that can also happen through organizing, through identifying like what's really going on with folks, because I think that that's a big thing, especially like post-pandemic. We actually have an incredible opportunity, as we're still societally and individually in this regathering period, to do that much better. and to do that with the care and, quite frankly, the tools that we're learning from younger people as a way to be clear with your needs, to like understand emotions. Like the other tool that I think is really important, if you haven't checked it out, is the feelings wheel. So whoever created the feelings wheel was also a genius. And like I encourage people to go and print a copy out of the feelings wheel and literally like use it as a bookmark. So I guess I'll stop there.
Awesome.
No, I'll
And
just
please,
jump
yeah.
in. Yeah, just jump in briefly. And I think I need to dedicate a shelf to books that you've recommended to me recently, Matt. So I'm building that out because they all sound great and like great resources. I think one thing that I've been thinking about around this question is that that in some ways the inclusivity around a next system teaching is also going to include in many places people who are not used to being in spaces that are very movement oriented, or they're not used to being academics. I'm talking about here. They're not used to working in collaboration with people, in neighborhoods and communities. They may be coming from fields of study where they're not actually, social scientists and humanities or environmental studies folks. They may be coming from, from engineering or from other fields, which is not to say there isn't all kinds of great community engaged research that's happening in engineering, but you get my drift. So I think one of the things that that an interesting and successful teach-in for me would have to struggle with is the fact that there are going to be people coming in who who operate with a lot of the sort of common practices in academia, right? Who are, and that we actually do want them involved. We want the people who have not been thinking of themselves as political because they're scientists and science is not political, and who are realizing that science, after all, the truth is political, to be involved in this because they have a lot to offer. They have a lot to bring. And that's going to be a tension, I think, in this process as it grows as well. So, but I really appreciate everything that Jasmine you had to say, and Matt, I'm really excited about what this video is going to look like because I think it's going to be useful to a lot of people who weren't able to be here today, as well as everybody who's here today.
Okay. So I'm just kind of looking through the chat, and I see some comments from M. O'Hara. I wonder, would you like to jump in if we can do that, or I'm happy to try and summarize them and be.
I'm trying to elevate them so that they can join, but I'm not seeing them here.
All right, well, let me just, so one thing they say is that they are trying to do outreach to, oh, here,
There they are.
here we are. Okay.
Hi, sorry. I'm sure you would have recapped it beautifully. I appreciate you letting me come off of mute though, because yeah, I can tend to ramble in chats. Thanks all of you for being here with us. And I am a student, but I'm also an organizer with a group called Free Her Vermont, which is ending the incarceration of women and girls. And yeah, we're just at this kind of not rupture point, but at this place where uh, we're we're trying to align with other groups that we don't necessarily need to convince, or that do need a lot of convincing, whereas a lot of people who are already in our camp, so to speak, have been convinced. And just wondering what that looks like now, obviously while still maintaining safety with our community. Oh, no way. Yeah, it's Jaina Assoff is our campaign director out here in Vermont. So
Yeah, I think should we start answering the
Please.
question?
Yeah.
Is that and before I wanted to say, like, I do think in my experience with teach-ins is that when they're done right, they do create this environment where people tap into, like, not just why they're doing this, but I think it does get to the realm of love. Like what is guiding, everyone has love inside of them, a deep love. And I think like social movement spaces and transformative spaces really like test your own personal deep why. Why are you doing this? How can it be rooted in love? And a part of love, and to like start answering the question, is empathy. I think the practice of empathy is critical to what I would call going beyond the base, because there's a lot of sort of automatic empathy built in when we're talking to our base or to our closest friends. There's like a lot of like sort of from the relationship building, we built up this positive regard, or sometimes it can become unconditional positive regard. But I think going beyond the base, like really understanding, there's a practice about empathy mapping. Like you can actually empathy map who is in this realm. Sort of what are they about? And then I actually think building out questions that when you interact with people beyond the base that you can ask that like really build that empathy. And I come from a space where I used to um, I like ran a pizzeria in like Milwaukee South Side and a coffee shop. And so, when you're like a front line of community centered small businesses, like you literally deal with everyone. And people would come in, the pizzeria in particular, like honestly, like straight up violent white supremacists would come in and insult everybody, our whole staff. Then they would eat the pizza and love it, and they would totally transform. There would be a trend, and I know that most people of color who run restaurants or who are in this industry have experienced that, and I think it's so yeah. So the practice, the both the like perspective shifting, but also the active, rigorous practice of empathy, I think can get us a long way here, which is a rigorous practice that, again, is something that we should be doing daily.
Yeah. Jasmine, do you want to react if you?
Yeah, I mean, that's great feedback, Matt. I think that a lot of the urgency of the moment and the activation of our fight and flight, the constant deluge of threat, and also just on a collective level, the amount of trauma that we have from an intergenerational perspective has kind of got us in this rapid response, fire out what the thing is really quickly. And when we're approaching folks, we approach them with that kind of political posture of, do you know who Marx is? Do you believe in economic justice? Do you like immediately to right? And I think some of our elders, particularly those from like the Harlem Renaissance that informed, like they would be like, where's the jazz to what you're doing? Like, where's the bachata? Where's the, like, where are you going into an invitation to dance with someone? Um, and I think there has to be a practice and an invitation to do that, to say that our entry point immediately has to be curiosity to hear the story of the other and to find ways that we connect rather than an immediate pop quiz about what do you believe? Is it right? Is it wrong? Okay, you're qualified, you're not qualified. Or even just the assumption that because they're in the space, they immediately believe exactly what we believe. So I think inviting slowness that is appropriate in the context of the urgency of what we're trying to do, and a little bit more of romance, and rather than like the cold hand of the ideological hammer and the policy wonk, right? Like those things we've seen how they're useful, but they have been the overused tools. And so coming back to the texture and beauty of getting our hands dirty in the garden of community is really, really critical in this moment.
Yeah, I just want to say how much I appreciate this. I've been thinking, part of what we're witnessing on the right is this question about, why it feels so easy for people to want to demonize others, right? Is there a desire here? And part of resistance has to look like just what you're both describing. It has to look like a practice of empathy and curiosity. It has to look like living otherwise in daily
Right.
relationships.
Right. And the last thing I'll say, and I used to be a private clinician, a licensed therapist in the state of Arkansas, is that if we are supposed to be making our movements irresistible, and we're supposed to be wooing folks into a vision of what is possible and the beauty of future worlds and systems, we can't be engaging in the same kind of harm that many of us experience in our family of origin. Like nobody wants a parent or caretaker, a mom or a dad or whomever else who immediately is telling us exactly how we'll never measure up and not be good enough. We want a secure attachment. We want kindness. We want unconditional positive regard. And we want the confidence to know that if we fuck up, and even if we fuck up real bad, there will be people there to love us and help us do better. And that's how our movements should look. But instead, they have been inundated with a carceral logic of othering and, this hyper critical kind of way that we've moved with one another. So I think there's a call to revive that kind of woo and gentleness, but gentleness again with rigor and discipline.
Great. Gabriel, I see you have a hand.
Yeah, I think somebody else though had their hand up before
I
me.
saw PG as well with a hand,
Yeah.
and I wasn't sure it went away. Thank you for. Maybe you should go ahead, and then we can see if we can
Yeah.
use tech to get PG in as well.
Yeah, I actually wanted to write my question in the Q&A thing, but I can't, I guess, because I'm a panelist. So, um, uh, yeah, my question revolves around student organizing and some of the challenges in there. Uh, in my experience, I've noticed that because students are only on campus usually around 4 years, it's really difficult to build long, long movements that have some sort of strategy and plan. Also, I mean, there's also this intergenerational aspect. Student movements usually lack that, and for better for worse, leads to certain outcomes. So I was wondering how you can address those challenges and organize effectively on campus.
Yeah, I'll take a crack at that. And I was really glad that Stephanie Luce pointed out one of the bright spots, and it's not just a spot, but a bright wave of student worker organizing, because that is someplace where we have seen some real progress. And so my criticism of the labor movement, the union movement in particular, for not getting the backs of the student movement, is a little outdated. It dates to the 1990s when we were struggling to defend student associations and we just didn't get support. But what has happened is you've seen this huge upsurge in student worker organizing into unions. And that's really important because I think one of the things that we learned in the 90s when I was an undergraduate student with Matt at the University of Wisconsin back then is that when you built organizations that brought students, faculty, staff, and community members into the same organization. You can call it a union, you can call it an alliance, you can call it a higher education network, right? That you can bring all the strengths that each set of actors has to bring into alignment. It's a kind of an ecological awareness, right? And they can look out for each other. Students will do things and can do things that faculty will not and don't think they can do. Faculty can provide support and longevity in an institutional. Everybody here, I think, who's gathered has some sense of this. So I think that's one of the things that's very necessary. But one part of that then requires those of us who are not undergraduate students to make sure that we are helping undergrads to build organization. So I just wanted to sort of start off with that. The other thing I want to say, just on the previous conversation, and I want to stay on Gabe's question here, but on the previous conversation, I'm just thinking about the relationship between that culture and practice of empathy and the need to protect our community members. And it's just it's a struggle because our students and staff are under attack, and our campus police forces not only are not protecting our students from white supremacy, but are actually participating in it. And so that's something in terms of the teach-in process that I think we're going to need to grapple with as well. So at the same time, we have to, take those material actions to protect our people, the members of our community, and also practice that culture of empathy. I'm wondering about what I would call higher education unionism, that question about dealing with student transience and stability.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Matt or Jasmine, would you like to speak to Gabe's question?
Yeah, and maybe I can tee up Jasmine a bit because I was really compelled about this conversation around qualify. Because I do think it's our job to help qualify people to be their best selves in the space. And I wonder how, I mentioned how people are thinking about that now because there's been a lot of like conventions to think about it. I remember early in digital organizing, the theory of change was you pair information to action. So you pair like rapid response, this is happening, oh no, this is happening, with like now you can take action. And that work transactionally in a certain ways and help mobilize in a certain ways. But then people really understood that actually, if you got people to care, then people would participate more deeply and more long term. So if you paired caring with deeper action, that became, something that was more effective, and just like I think better practice. But I wonder, how people are thinking about it, and even Gabe, how you're thinking about how might we best qualify more people and help, aid, support, guide, people's engagement and participation, because a lot of theory was around, oh, there's a ladder of engagement. First you do this, first you come to a convergence, and then you just, but that's actually all thrown out the window too when like we're in this environment. It's no longer a ladder of engagement. In many ways, it's a cliff of engagement that people are jumping off of. And so how do we then retool our structures, our commitments, our like practice to qualify, you know, current generation and next generations to actually like be build enough power to accomplish what we need.
Jasmine, do you want to jump in?
Sure, I think my recommendations are less theoretical and more like literal recommendations on what you need to do. Yeah, what Ben was saying around the cross-generational importance of faculty and community members is a critical piece. With Uncoke My Campus, our first priority was always about creating a durable structure for passing the torch or the baton. It's a relay race, and we knew that we had students that might be there for 4 years, they might be there for 2, they might be there a little bit longer. So we knew that we had to establish systems to keep all of our knowledge and resources, like our organizing guides, like our campaign documentation, even our running notes, available to people. If you logged into Uncoke's archive, you could get notes from 2015 and do a synthesis of all of those running meetings, obviously with digital security in mind, because we know we had people who were doing things. And then also we created transition plans. Like when we had a cohort of folks, we were like, what is the process for actually handing off responsibilities and knowledge to incoming organizers? And then we created mentorship programs. And then the last thing that we did that was really, really useful was we created, I think Matt was speaking to this, sort of like a pipeline of leadership development of like teaching people what are our core values, what are our core goals, and what have we been doing with this campaign that was successful, what were our failures, what were the lessons, what are the conditions we think you're going into. And then we convened, Uncoke acted as a convener for that intergenerational component that linked Uncoke My Campus GMU to Uncoke, Arizona, to Uncoke, Florida, and brought folks into that space. The last thing that I'll say that we didn't do because we were a poor bootstrapped, fiscally sponsored project that everyone thought we were just insane for what we were even trying to do was we longed for a secure digital space where anyone who had been a part of our work could convene and be in that space. We tried different formations, but ideally creating, Gabrielle, excuse me, if you can create a space that is not owned by private corporate interests like Facebook, because all we had at the time was like Facebook groups and maybe a couple of signal chats here and there, but something where you can bring folks who have been legacy to the project, who are new or who are interested, and kind of keep them in that cultivation space. Because there are people who will leave and not be connected for a year or two, and then some development happens and you need a way to have a broadcast to them, and that would reactivate them. And so creating that ecosystem or that container is also something that I would have liked to have done during the life of that campaign.
Yeah, and I'm just, I'm noticing in the chat, and Ben spoke to this as well. There real concerns about security and safety and how to organize with that in mind right now. What can be said publicly, how to manage the real threat that students are facing. So I just want to acknowledge that. It looks like, Ben, they're great, wonderful comments, but no folks posing a specific question. I wonder, in our last few minutes, we're going to start thinking in the next section about building meaningful mass participation. But I want to just give the panelists a chance to leave us with some last words, just a piece of wisdom going forward as folks start thinking about how to do their own work in their own spaces and communities. So maybe we'll start again with Ben.
Sure. So I think speaking of practical advice, this convergence has been about taking a step towards the next system teach-ins in November. And in some ways, November is a long way away. In other ways, we're talking about 7 months from now, and summer is going to be in between, and all kinds of things are going to be happening. So for all of us, there are steps that we are taking now to make the teach-ins that we organize locally effective. So I really just want to say that that this process is ongoing in terms of imagining what the teach-ins might look like, and that there are ways that people can be involved. We'll talk a little bit about those during the closing session, about sort of the process for the teach-ins and how people can be involved in helping to build them. And there's a lot of building to be done in the coming months, and so we're here because people have been doing that work, and there's some new relationships here. There are many new relationships. There are some older relationships that have been building over some time. And it just feels very good to be here with all of you. So that's not anything else on the question of what does a teach-in look like. It's just more of a comment on where I'm seeing us at this particular moment, and an invitation which will be extended over and over again.
Which is one way a teach-in looks and feels, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess so.
Jasmine, last words from you.
Ooh. I tell all of our new student organizing fellows and parent organizing fellows that it's about building a relationship, not just campaigns. The most powerful organizing, as Matt surfaced in the very beginning of this conversation, is built on relationships, not on transactions. Create records, right? Like create, not like we're worshiping the written word, but part of what we're doing is we're not just organizing for today, we're trying to build to the future. And that requires archives and documentation and oral, history. So create like that living guide of the work that you're doing in a collective. And then like finally, connect your work to a broader struggle and find a political home, because that may not be the folks who are a part of your teach-in. It could be, but this is protracted work. It is transformative work that will make you confront parts of yourself and parts of society that you can't always anticipate. And so having comrades and community that are really committed to your preservation and the preservation of the goodness of society is critical. So yeah, find that political home and your ride or die folks who are going to have your back.
Awesome in that.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I have a old friend of mine who's 93, and he has a neighbor who, if his shades don't go up by 10 a.m., the neighbor will come over and will call his daughter, and every day. So he has to have his shades up. He has to be engaged. He has to be seen. And I say that to say, like, we all actually need that neighbor or need to be that neighbor. And however that looks, especially now, especially in the truly brutal environment we're in now, find people that you can check in with every day. Find somebody that checks in with you every day. So either be that neighbor or like get that neighbor, because and do it well into your 90s.
Oh, that is a beautiful word to end with. Thank you all so much. Thank you all participants who are here. There's a gorgeous chat with lots of people sharing comments and connections, and reach out to me and email me. We're so grateful.